Welcome everyone. My name is Denise Bordecas-Sterna. Thank you for joining us today for a webinar on how top brands are using data and analytics to fuel a customer-centric approach to marketing, featuring Scott Berzina of DataXu and Joanna O'Connell of Forrester. Scott recently joined DataXu as Chief Marketing Officer based out of our Boston, Massachusetts headquarters. Joanna O'Connell is Principal Analyst at Forrester, serving marketing leadership professionals. Our agenda today will explore navigating the new customer journey, how and why Ford and Team Detroit changed their approach to media buying, and then conclude with a live Q&A session. Be sure to send your questions during the webinar. And now, without further ado, Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Denise. Welcome, everyone. Today's topic is important for all marketers, and I'm excited to join in the conversation. At DataXu, we work with hundreds of brands and agencies around the world to better engage with consumers. Possibly the biggest trend we're seeing is how digital adoption is changing the customer journey along the path to purchase. Today's all-digital lifestyle is changing how consumers make buying decisions. Nowhere is this more apparent than in advertising and how customers interact with brands. The customer journey built into traditional marketing systems and processes no longer exists. Consumers are now in the driver's seat. They're choosing where they want to go and what they want to hear. Rather than trusting what brands are telling them about what to buy, they're much more likely to turn to their virtual communities of peers. In fact, 5 stars on Yelp recommending a restaurant or product can mean more than a celebrity spokesperson endorsement today. And just think about how you or your family and friends make purchases. When was the last time you went to a big box store and relied solely on or even asked a clerk for information? Today we use our smartphones, tablets, and laptops to inform and educate and make purchases in store. In fact, research shows that 2/3 of today's consumers use their mobile device to check online prices while in store. Nearly 80% of U.S. Internet users used mobile coupons upon checkout in store this year. And lastly, almost 70% of tablet owners used their devices to shop from the comfort of their couches in the last 30 days. This is today's digital lifestyle. We need to say goodbye to old school thinking and rework our approach to interacting with customers along their buying journey. We need to get away from the one-size-fits-all messaging, which promotes generic rather than personalized customer experience. When our marketing efforts are siloed across channels and devices, we're blocking valuable opportunities for true customer insights and efficiency gains across the entire media plan. And finally, relying on hunches and stale data is no longer effective. You need to know who your best customers are right now, so you can engage them when they're actually interested. But savvy marketers already know this and understand that the key to adapting their programs to the new customer journey lies in data and analytics. The volume of customer-related data is growing every day, and we now have the technology and the tools that can derive actionable insight from that data. The challenge and the opportunity is how to transform raw data into a deeper understanding of your customers so you can deliver a relevant, personalized experience to them, the right message at the right time on the right channel. In other words, how do you transform data into insight and then into action? Obviously, a new approach is required to operationalize the process of turning data into measurable marketing results. It needs to become part of your marketing DNA. The approach is called programmatic marketing. Programmatic marketing can help solve marketers' biggest challenges. Unfortunately, there's a lot of FUD in the industry around the term. So let's talk about what it really means. First of all, programmatic marketing is the use of consumer data and business rules, in other words, algorithms, across the entire marketing plan. It's the adoption of a real-time decisioning platform to deliver the right message to the right consumer at exactly the right time across channels and devices. And it means being able to measure and tailor every interaction to each consumer at the impression level. And a true programmatic marketing approach continually learns what works and what doesn't to automatically optimize in real time and deliver ever-increasing better results. But it's not just technology for technology's sake. Programmatic marketing is about reducing costs while increasing sales. It makes you more efficient by eliminating wasteful media spend and automating time and resource-intensive manual work. It makes you more effective by identifying and focusing on your highest value consumers and personalizing the creative message for those consumers. And lastly, it delivers in real time a continual stream of valuable insights about consumers and their digital behaviors. What marketing problems or questions can be answered by analyzing the data coming from your existing media investment? What insights can be gained about your consumers? To answer that, let's take a look at an example. Here, a financial services firm was looking to drive new brokerage account openings. By analyzing which consumers engaged with the campaign and completed the account applications, they found that Infinity and Mini owners were most likely to apply online rather than use offline application methods. We also found that Jaguar, Land Rover, and Cadillac owners go online to research brokerage products but don't typically apply online. These findings caused the financial services firm to change how they engaged with their target customers, resulting in an increased application rate. So we can see that actionable data is the key that will help you move to a marketing approach that's focused on the customer. But there's another consequence of the new digital lifestyle. And we're having a little fun here, but Veruca Salt was way ahead of us as she explored Willy Wonka's chocolate factory back in 1971. Customers don't care about media channels, devices, or publishers when assessing brands. They form and share opinions about a brand based on their experiences with it, wherever and whenever those interactions occur. They don't want an ad for kick-ass cupcakes when they've been searching for organic health food. They care about getting what they want, when they want it, in a relevant, personalized experience. By consolidating and analyzing the many sources of data you have access to, your media, your website, your CRM data, you can give them exactly what they want. And let's face it, if you can't keep up with them, your competitors happily will. So as we've seen in the digital world, the traditional customer no longer exists. The consumer is in the driver's the consumer is the driver, not a passenger, and legacy methods of marketing no longer is effective. The new customer journey is not linear, it's dynamic. Consumers bounce from browsing on their laptops to researching on their mobile to watching a video review on their tablet, and often making many more stops across channels and devices before taking action and converting. Delivering a consistent consumer experience throughout the new customer journey is possible, but it requires a new approach. It requires the right tools and technologies to capture and analyze data and act on it in real time. And one company understands that. This is our customer, Ford Motor Company. By changing their marketing to focus on the customer and the new customer journey, Ford saw a 50% increase in the efficiency of their media investments and a 20% increase in customer engagement. It doesn't get much more tangible than that. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Joanna. She will go into more detail about how and why Ford and their agency Team Detroit achieved this. Joanna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks as well to Denise and to the whole DataXu team for having me today. And certainly thanks to those of you who've joined. I hope this hour proves interesting and useful for everybody. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I saw Team Detroit and Ford do over the course of a couple of years to really fundamentally alter their approach to digital media buying, management, measurement, optimization, and the like. And I think it's a pretty amazing story. I'm excited that they were willing to share it with me and let me publish it. So, you know, I'm going to pick up on a theme and repeat a theme that you would have heard Scott just talk about, but it's worth repeating, frankly, over and over and over again, because it really needs to be the place where we all begin and end when it comes to the marketing decisions that we're making, and that is with consumers and with a focus on consumers. And as Scott mentioned, and certainly as we're seeing in our research at Forrester, consumer behavior, consumer attitudes are fundamentally changing, and it's happening really, really fast. And it's really forcing some concurrent changes inside of marketing organizations, with publishers, and with technology vendors who are frankly struggling in some ways, and in other ways really in a race to try and keep up with this changing consumer behavior. And when I say fast, just to sort of hammer it home for everybody, let's all just remind ourselves that the iPad did not exist 4 years ago. And when we think about the way in which people operate today and how the tablet is sort of part and parcel of daily human life these days for many of us, it really hammers the point home. So I love this quote. It's an oldie but goodie for me. I use it all the time because I think it really sums up our challenge as an ecosystem. And this was from Colette DeLerner, who at the time was at Guthy Ranker, who was a very, very large direct response advertiser. And she said this on a panel. She said, consumer behavior has changed and we're behind the curve. And I just remember scrawling it on a piece of paper when she said it and thinking, aha, that is exactly the problem that we have. And she summed it up perfectly, and it's that simple and it's that hard to fix, all in one sentence. And I love the graphic underneath because I think that does a good job of visually capturing our challenge, which is consumers are constantly just a few evolutionary steps ahead of us in the marketing community. So what do we do about it? You know, that is the question. So Scott really already touched on some of these themes. I'm going to come at them from the Forrester perspective, which frankly are probably going to sound pretty similar because I think we're aligned here. You know, when we think about how consumers are changing the way they behave and really, frankly, changing the way in which they think about brands, think about interacting with brands, choose to interact with brands, make decisions, develop loyalties, break ties with brands, we really need to evolve the way we think about a number of things as marketers, but in this case, certainly the way in which we think about media buying, media management, media measurement. So what do we need to see happen in media buying? And this is something that comes from Forrester's thinking around this and is sort of woven throughout the playbook that we developed around the topic of digital media buying. So the first is that we need to move to a model that is much more audience-centric. We've always lived in a world where media, the newspaper section, the radio content, the television program, was the way in which we really, frankly, were buying the media that we were procuring on behalf of our brands, on behalf of our clients. We live now in a world, and I'm sure everyone on the phone knows this, I certainly hope you know it at this point, where there are tools that allow us to make very, very, very targeted user-level kinds of purchases when we look at tools like demand-side platforms, about which I've written pretty extensively, and data management platforms, about which recently I've written pretty extensively. The tools are there to move to a model that is about audience centricity. Incidentally, this is not to say that I don't believe heavily in the value of environment or in the value of context. It is only to say that that is no longer the only way in which we can speak to and find audiences. So, you know, I heard Scott use the word data a whole bunch of times, and I know it's a word that everybody's probably tired of hearing, but I can't say enough about the role and value of data in marketing going forward. So when I talk about data-driven media buying, what I'm really talking about is moving from a model that I experienced as a media planner and buyer when I was at an agency in the early days of display media, where it was plan, buy, analytics team reports, manual optimization, lather, rinse, repeat. So it was a little bit of a set it and forget it model, quite frankly, and it was certainly unidirectional. So when I talk about data-driven, what I'm talking about is taking data and constantly injecting it back into the system to feed analysis, which feeds new decisions. So it's continuous, it's iterative, it's always moving, it's always evolving. And then finally, certainly Scott mentioned this, and I'll mention it as well. You know, at Forrester, we probably have hundreds and hundreds of reports at this point that talk about consumer behaviors, consumers going omni-channel, cross-device behaviors, and the like. And it's really my job to talk about what that means when it comes to media buying. And certainly, I'm kind of on a personal mission to get rid of the channel-specific last touch point attribution model that has plagued our industry for years and years and years. I'm also on a mission, though, to see us move to a model where we're truly targeting consumers wherever they go as individual consumers, obviously in a way that is privacy appropriate. And what's so interesting is that I am starting to finally find evidence of brands that are really putting their money where their mouth is and pursuing those kinds of approaches to marketing. So this is a graphic that I've doctored up just a little bit from a report that we wrote called The Future of Digital Media Buying, which is a bit of a grandiose title, but just really talks about some of the major themes that we think marketers should be paying attention to as they are thinking about media buying down the road. And for us, the three big pillars really when it comes to sophisticated media management are the adoption, and not just sort of on paper, not just kind of outsourcing, not just saying, oh, my agency's doing it for me, but truly the adoption on a philosophical level straight through to the actual management of the media of programmatic buying, and using that as important a tool in the toolbox as the kind of great brand experience custom buying that we agency types have been doing for a long time. Secondly, a model that is much more about audience and data management first and having that feed decisions. And then, you know, completing this wheel would be multi-channel measurement. You know, at least in the short term, we're talking about advanced attribution. Long term, ideally, we'd be talking about full multi-channel measurement. So, you know, when I think about how marketers are getting smarter, getting savvier, I tend to think about it within the context of these pillars, which I think really kind of sum up the big components here. And just PS before I talk about this, although you're fine to leave it on this, we're fine to leave it on this slide for now. I know it doesn't have it on that on that last slide, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear that creative, of course, is also fundamentally important in that mix. You know, the message is arguably among the most important components. But you know, what we're going to be talking about, certainly when we're talking about the Ford example, is how message, the determination of the appropriate message is made using data. So when we look at the future here, we really believe that the future is all about programmatic, is about audience centricity, and is about a world that spans channels. So if we look at what that means from a client perspective, we envision a world where data management and analytics conceivably could come together in a single solution. Certainly where we have a model of first, second, and third-party data being pumped in a more centralized and unified fashion into that platform or platforms, rather than kind of what you still see today, which is sort of a scattered ad hoc buying of third-party data, and 18 remarketing programs running at once, which is a big no-no. I think we'll have a world where a significant amount of the addressable supply will be available programmatically, and Scott certainly talked about some of the underpinnings of programmatic. You know, the big thing here is a model that is more automated, a model that is based on decision-making through data in real time, and a model that is operationally much more efficient. And certainly, this does not mean that the agency is not important. The agency's role evolves in this ecosystem. You can see there are many places in which the agency plays a critical part in helping bring all of this to fruition for clients. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that, you know, simply outsourcing to an ad network and calling it programmatic really isn't good enough. You know, when I'm talking about really evolving your approach to digital media buying, it is about a real commitment to the right technologies and to expert service to be able to achieve optimal results. So, you know, we've taken some time over the last couple of years to think about the phases of maturity that marketers pass through when it comes to digital media buying, and we created a model, a framework to kind of bring that to life. The reality is that the media buying maturity we see still varies quite widely across the marketer landscape. We're no longer at the point where 90% of marketers are super immature, but we're certainly not at the point yet where the majority of marketers are doing things in the most sophisticated way. There's really a wide spectrum. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the maturity stages that we see. And it's across 4 kind of core pillars. So the first is organization, and that can be both staffing, that can be related to cultural attitudes, can be related to the company's sort of senior level belief in and commitment to digital. Planning and execution is what it sounds like. Measurement, what it sounds like. And then technology is really about adoption of new kinds of technologies, commitment to using those technologies effectively, and adoption of the range of technologies that are available. So if we look at Skeptics, and this is the earliest phase of maturity, these are folks that still haven't gotten on the bus. I'm very happy to say that I run into far fewer of these kinds of marketers than I did even just a couple years ago. You know, these are folks that are very traditionally focused, don't have digital media personnel that are dedicated to digital, definitely don't have media analytics or marketing IT that are dedicated to media and marketing. They maybe have a very traditional agency that has very limited capabilities. So organizationally, they don't have the staff, and culturally, they're not committed. When it comes to planning and execution, it tends to be very rigid. You know, it may be annual still, minimal to no optimization during the programs, and you know, in terms of the use of data as a real-time input, that basically doesn't happen. When it comes to measurement, believe it or not, there are still some folks out there that are using click-only site visits, for example, as their primary KPI. Certainly, when it comes to attribution, they're on last touch point, if they even have an ad server in place, and there are no ties to ROI or customer value. From a tech standpoint, you know, they maybe have something like an ad server in place, but not much else. Certainly no dedicated measurement technologies in place, and the things that are in place for first-party data are really not being used for digital. So as I said, thankfully not so many of those guys anymore. So experimenters know digital matters and they want to improve, so that's the good news, but they have a ways to go. In terms of, you know, if I'm cutting up the market, 100% of marketers, you know, there's probably 25% of the market that looks like this, maybe 30%. So these are folks that have some digital channel owners in place, but they're not really coordinated across channels. If they are, it's very ad hoc. Perhaps they have, one analytics person that's dedicated to marketing, but it's pretty unlikely they have anybody in IT that's dedicated to marketing. When it comes to the agencies, they're not very well coordinated across channel owners. You might start to see quarterly, from a planning standpoint, quarterly planning, but certainly there's not much fluidity in budgeting. There's frankly very little. And optimization tends to occur within channels. And when it comes to data, they're starting to think about how to inject data into these systems, but it's still fairly ad hoc. You're starting to see some development around KPIs. They're starting to think more deeply about channel-specific KPIs, but they're not really at the point yet where they're thinking of digital and are treating digital as foundational to their business and measuring it and optimizing it appropriately and investing in it appropriately. And from a technology standpoint, these still are not the folks that are going to be, active direct users of things like DSPs and DMPs. So practitioners are really making material changes to evolve, and I'm seeing a lot more of this type than I used to, which is great. These folks are digital believers. They're working to increase digital spend to the appropriate levels. They've got channel-based teams of experts. Thankfully, these are being coordinated by a strategic lead that is existing across channels. They're starting to get pretty strong analytics staff in place. They're much more sort of strategically on the same boat as their agency and working much more closely with the agency and or any other kinds of strategic partners or vendors. You're starting to see some fluidity across channels when it comes to budgeting. So, for example, there may be fluidity across search and display. Certainly much more frequent media optimization. And when it comes to measurement, these are the folks that are noodling around with advanced attribution. They maybe are not yet at the point where they are taking those advanced attribution outputs and directly and immediately applying them to the media, but they're committed to the concept of advanced attribution and they're playing around with it. And when it comes to tech, these guys are using the DSPs. They're thinking about things like tag management systems, and they're starting to really do some good work with first and third-party data. Maybe they're RFPing for a data management platform. And then the nirvana here are the conductors, and these are the folks that are mastering real-time data-driven media management. This is what I want the world to look like when I look at marketing organizations from a digital media buying standpoint. Channel agnostic test and learn culture, where it's all about putting the consumer at the center. You have very senior level support for digital. You have very senior level support for connected experiences. There's dedicated marketing analytics and dedicated marketing IT staff. They're considered by their partners and vendors to be hallmark partners. They're great communicators. They are strategic partners. They effectively share responsibility with their partners. And from a planning and execution standpoint, execution is as automated as current tools will allow, without sacrificing certainly inventory, channel, and data access. And that's important, right? Because we still have a fairly immature programmatic marketplace, come a long way in the last handful of years, but there's lots more opportunity ahead of us. So these conductors are the kinds of folks that know the limitations of the market, are constantly pushing the boundaries, and yet are able to work effectively within the constraints of the current market. From an optimization standpoint, they're using algorithmic optimization wherever appropriate. They may be doing things like applying insights real time from an advanced attribution system into a DSP. And again, are really pushing the boundaries of what the tools can do. They certainly are moving to a model that is much more about audience centricity from a measurement standpoint. They're thinking about how they are moving consumers through the purchase life cycle. They have either developed advanced attribution modeling in-house or have gone out and found it. Maybe they've even noodled around with a few different vendors until they found the one that they feel the best about, or they have a couple of approaches that they're using. And certainly digital ROI is well understood and regularly calculated. From a technology standpoint, it's about building the tech stack with a goal of seamless integration across all of the different technologies to be able to drive consumers through the purchase life cycle. So that sounds pretty good, right? I mean, that's really what we'd like to see all marketers look like, arguably, and certainly folks are welcome to disagree with me. But you know, when we looked at the ecosystem, this really seemed to us like where the world needed to be. So what I love about Ford, and the case study that I did with Ford came well after the digital media buying maturity model was built, is that it was very clear to me in speaking with Ford and Team Detroit how they had evolved across those four pillars in really sort of clear ways that mapped quite beautifully, quite elegantly to this maturity model. And I thought, what a great example of how a client has developed and acted on a roadmap to improve their approach to digital media buying and management. So the big aha for Ford came from the very top of that organization, Jim Farley, who said, you know, we talk about being one Ford, but we're not all rowing the boat in the same direction, and we really need to do that. We really need to refocus our energy and therefore organizationally evolve to put consumers at the center of everything that we do. So for Ford, you know, and I can understand that for some of you on the phone, you might be thinking, well, geez, I don't have a Jim Farley at my organization. But the nice thing about this story, I hope, is that even if you don't have a Jim Farley at your organization, this can serve as a model that you can take back to some folks internally and say, see how successful things can be when there is this kind of support inside a marketing organization for change, and look at the benefits that this particular company has reaped from evolving. So for these guys, it did start with an organizational change. Organizationally, the big shift here was from a nameplate-focused orientation that was pretty siloed, and by nameplate I mean focused or Mustang, to one that was much more about the consumer. So, you know, traditionally the way that you know, folks budget is that brands own budget, and those lines are pretty well established and not crossed. And what's so neat about what Ford did here is that they actually loosened those rules. They blurred those lines so that there was a portion of money that was no longer simply allocated brand by brand or nameplate by nameplate, but was really available to be used to support whatever was appropriate at any given moment when a consumer could be served some kind of message. So they still do lots of, you know, top of funnel, great, splashy, wonderful, nameplate-focused work to fill that funnel, to create awareness and buzz and engagement with these nameplate-specific budgets. But then this fluid budget can actually be used to really be best matched to the consumer's most appropriate message. So imagine, for example, that they, in this case, and I know Scott mentioned this, imagine, for example, in working with a company like DataXu, what they could do was take a premium buy on a traditional publisher where typically the ad that would be served would be based on whomever controlled the budget for that particular ad, and swapping that model out for one where the ad that was served was based on, in real time, what was known about that consumer, so that the ad was most relevant to that consumer. So even if the budget theoretically would have been a Mustang budget, if the user that showed up on that website was really better matched to a Fiesta ad, then that user got the Fiesta ad. And I know that sounds basic, like, oh, well, that's just dynamic creative optimization. You're just optimizing creative on the fly. Yeah and no, because again, what Ford was really doing here was loosening these traditional silos, breaking up these traditional silos to better match message to consumer. And by using a real-time technology like a DSP, they were able to do it. And they realized great gains. They saw a 20% increase in consumer action rates on these premium buys. So it wasn't just a theoretically good thing to do. It was a materially beneficial thing to do for their bottom line. And obviously, we're going to take questions. So if this stuff is confusing or if you have questions on it, I will do my very best to answer them at the end, because it is a little bit, it's quite a lot to get through. So from a planning and execution standpoint, I love this one too, because selfishly it maps a little bit to how I was thinking about the world when I was still at the agency. I was at Razorfish for a really long time and really got excited about the whole idea of programmatic buying, though we didn't call it that then, and co-launched a trading desk because I really loved the idea of using data and real-time technologies to do buying. But not every media planner and or buyer is of that mind. There are different kinds of people out there with different kinds of skills and areas of expertise and interests. And what I like about what the Team Detroit guys did is that they recognized, specifically John Gray, recognized that he was probably better served having experts doing the kinds of buying that they were most interested in and best at to really get the best results from the team. So he moved from a model where he had media planners and buyers responsible for nameplate level media across all stages of the consumer purchase cycle, whether it was the splashy top of funnel stuff or the real-time data-driven down funnel stuff, to a model where functional experts were actually managing specific stages of the purchase cycle. So he had folks that focused on the top of the funnel brand stuff, and then he had other folks that were focused on the highly analytical and tech-driven buying. And the reality is that that leads to happier, more effective employees that are going to excel at their assigned tasks. And I love that he did this because, to me, again, selfishly, it maps, I think, pretty well to what I ultimately think the world is going to look like, where we have these sort of brand-building, custom media program experts, and then lots and lots of folks that are really, really good at and interested in the use of data for real-time buying. And so when it came to measurement, this one's really cool. And you don't actually, I think, often see folks push the envelope quite this far. So I love this one. And I remember when I was speaking to John Gray about it, he said, you know, we know that we're sort of pushing past the point where the ecosystem might be, but we want to get to the point where when everybody gets there, you're already there. And so they're kind of constantly experimenting and pushing those boundaries to stay ahead of things, but also trying to operate within the constraints of the world as it exists today. So from a measurement standpoint, the really traditional way of thinking about digital media measurement is to tie success back to website activity. And we've been doing that for 15 years or more, probably more. You know, visited site, performed activity on site, bought product from site, et cetera, et cetera. You know, for Ford, it would be things like, you know, dealer locator or the like. What they realized was that marketing has an influence on people's attitudes and behaviors that are expressed in many, many ways that would not be captured based simply on looking at website activity that's tied back to media. And so they actually went out and partnered with Compete to start doing a much sort of broader form of measurement that was web-wide, where Compete could actually help them understand all of the different ways across the web in which consumers were expressing the output of the influence of marketing. And that would allow them to have a much more complete picture of how consumers were being influenced by marketing. And I love that one because it's a very, very consumer-centric way of thinking rather than a brand-centric way of thinking. My website is the center of my universe. That is the only way in which a consumer can express interest in me as a brand. And so, you know, one sort of sample benefit, of course, is that it really did a better job of effectively counting social presence as a part of the online conversion story. And then finally, these guys, much like many of us, were in a place, a couple years ago where they very heavily relied on outsourced full-service kinds of partners, where they would be buying from ad networks, where the ad networks themselves would be doing the media buying and the media management and the media optimization. I'm sure we've all experienced that. I certainly have. But they made the decision that for a variety of reasons, it made sense within Team Detroit for them to start taking on some of these things more directly. And so they moved to a model where they started taking the management of a variety of kinds of marketing technologies on in-house. Certainly they were looking for operational efficiencies and the efficiencies that would come from streamlining the number of partners that were touching their media dollars. But it was also about a much closer relationship between Team Detroit and Ford and the insights that were generated by these technologies. So they really wanted to have their hands in these things so that they could be the direct beneficiaries of all of the information that was coming out of them. And it simply improved the way that they could operate. So from an efficiency standpoint, of course, moving to a self-serve model brought them great efficiencies from a CPM standpoint. But again, even something as simple as being able to walk down the hall to the person that is managing the tool that you're interested in understanding more about created operational efficiencies for them. And certainly having data thrown out of these tools that could be applied back into the media programs created performance improvements for them. So I'm going to, before I actually talk about these next few things, I just want to pause for a second, and hopefully at this point I've sort of clearly told the story of how those guys, Team Detroit in partnership with their really wonderful clients at Ford, evolved the way that they thought about digital media buying and management, and therefore the way that they behaved when it came to digital media buying and management. They moved from a model that was about brand and siloed sort of brand-based decision-making and brand-based budgets to one where there was more of a one Ford approach, where there was more of a consumer-centric approach, where the budget could be used to support consumer sort of decisions and desires rather than simply only supporting a given brand's need. They moved from a model where planners and buyers were responsible for a whole bunch of things that perhaps were not necessarily what they were most interested in or best equipped to handle, to one where they had functional experts that were working in concert to drive consumers through the purchase cycle. Moved from a model where measurement was website-based with some KPIs to a model that is a lot more nuanced, that is consumer-oriented, web-wide based, and just significantly, I think, more rich in the data that it's capturing and understanding the influence of marketing. And they moved from a model where technology was not something that they were using directly, it was outsourced, to one where they became very hands-on with the technology that was available to them, and really have come a very long way in becoming experts in a wide range of technologies. So when I look at where they're going, a couple things I think really were highlights for me. The first was just their kind of ongoing pursuit of more and better and more sophisticated and more scaled programmatic buying. And that could take a couple forms. That can take the form of different kinds of relationships with inventory providers, negotiating on new kinds of terms with publishers than they have in the past, such as the ability to get access to certain audiences, for instance. That could also mean expanding the scope from a channel standpoint. Display, as we probably all know, is the low-hanging fruit when it comes to programmatic, because there's just an awful lot of it. There are myriad challenges in the mobile environment, but Team Detroit and Ford recognize that the world is going mobile, and they want to be there. And so they think of programmatic as being fundamentally a big part of the way that they buy media, and so pushing into channels like mobile is a big priority for them. In spite of all the challenges, they see the challenges and they forge ahead. And then the other one is big, big, big. This goes far beyond the bounds of paid media, and that is developing, as an organization, as a company, a holistic data strategy. So envision a world where you walk into the dealership and you're already experiencing a personalized experience because of the data that has been made available, that has been synthesized to create that personalized experience for you. Or once you are the owner of a Ford vehicle, everything is tailored to you based on the full range of data that can be collected and synthesized and used, even data coming from the car itself. So that is a very big, complex, long-term project for Ford and Team Detroit, and I think of that as being really global, in scope. But from a media standpoint, it can be as simple as thinking beyond the cookie, thinking about data management in a world that may not foundationally be based on the cookie. This is not to say that the cookie necessarily is going away, but what I like about what these guys are doing is exploring and preparing for a range of possible futures. So they're always trying to stay ahead of the curve in their desire and ability to be consumer-centric in the way that they market. So I know that was a lot. I hope it was a clear story. For me, as I said, it was a really neat one to get to do because they, selfishly, they were really doing a lot of the things that I thought were really exciting and that pointed to the future of digital media buying. And so I was happy that they were willing to let me share it with the broader community. So I guess we're going to open it up to questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna, and thank you, Scott. So just as a reminder to ask a question, go ahead and use the questions box located in the GoToWebinar console. So here is the first question. So I guess we'll start with Scott. So Scott, the example was Ford with their embedded agency, Team Detroit. Is an embedded agency required within a brand to realize the value, the efficiencies that Ford realized?
Yeah, good question. Ford certainly has a unique arrangement there with a close relationship with Team Detroit, but certainly not. We have customers all over the world that are using more arm's length agency relationships as well as using the solution in-house.
Joanna,
yeah,
do you want to add it?
Sure, yeah, I'll just jump in. I mean, I agree with Scott. I do think that the Ford Team Detroit relationship is a great, really symbiotic one. They really operate as partners, which I think is wonderful. I think it's every agency person's dream to have a client like that is trusting, that allows you to take chances, that thinks of you as a strategic partner. So I love that about them. But certainly the embeddedness, I don't think is a prerequisite to have that kind of relationship and develop this kind of approach to digital media buying. I certainly had, again, when I was at an agency, I had some clients where we had great strategic relationships that were more traditional in nature, where we were the external agency. But we could achieve great things simply by being good and symbiotic partners.
Thank you. So here's another one. I think probably maybe for Joanna. Can you discuss how Ford optimized their media spend in two dimensions? So one, propensity to buy a Ford car, and the second, the ability to afford, i.e., have enough good credit, good credit score to qualify for an auto loan.
Oh, geez! Now you're really testing my knowledge. I didn't get that deep with those guys about the specifics. I guess what I would say is that, long and short, they're always looking for ways in which they can take that kind of data and pump it into the system to use it to make smarter decisions. And that is something that I see in all kinds of marketing organizations these days as I'm looking at the DMP ecosystem. So, the great example that I can use is financial services, where they can't get it wrong. If they're going to show an offer to someone, they need to make certain that that offer is appropriate, that that person is qualified for that offer. So it is incredibly important to organizations like that the data that they have on consumers is accurate and is being used effectively in the targeting that they do. And one of the fun things about writing about data management platforms is I'm seeing these kinds of things now come to life, where this really, really rich and really valuable first-party data is being used in real time to influence message delivery.
Okay, here's another question for you. So how does programmatic marketing affect media planning jobs? It seems like this new method could potentially eliminate a lot of jobs.
That's a good question. It's a bit of an open question, I think, at the moment. Probably what we can all agree on is that operationally we're just not as efficient as our brethren in traditional media like television. That's just reality. So there is I think, a lot of room for streamlining and for operational efficiency. But I definitely believe in the value and role of people in this ecosystem. Certainly in marketing, without great ideas, we'd have nothing. So yeah, there is room to, I think, probably improve efficiency in some of the back office functions. But some of that real important upfront strategic work, I think, becomes even more important than ever. I think right now the problem is we have a lot of folks doing a lot of mundane stuff when we could be having perhaps fewer different kinds of folks doing more interesting, more valuable, more strategic stuff.
Thanks. So Scott, here's a question for you. From an attendee, do I need to operate these technologies like DSPs in-house, self-serve, in order to achieve the kind of ROI that Ford achieved, or can I use a platform vendors team to execute?
Yeah, another good question. It can be used either way. Ford started with platform, DataXu platform, DSP platform, and DataXu services, but are now self-serve. And again, we have clients in both scenarios. DataXu has very robust professional services teams around the world that are waiting to and willing to work with our clients to transfer the expertise and train and then also execute on an ongoing basis if that's the model that the client wants, and then all the way over to training for self-service and in-house.
I just want to make a comment on that too, if I could. I mean, here's the thing. These tools are really amazing and powerful tools. It's just as easy, I think, to not do a good job with one of these tools. I guess my point here is that you want to be careful. Simply deciding to go self-serve may not net out the same kind of results as if you worked with a partner who had the expertise, not just in the tool, but in the kinds of approaches in digital media buying that are going to make sense with that tool. So I like this idea of road mapping to self-service. At the very least, a model where you have a tight strategic relationship between client and vendor or provider, technology provider. There is a lot of responsibility on the client to understand what's happening. That means asking a lot of questions. Simply saying, oh, my partner handles that for me, I think is a little bit of a cop-out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the alternative has to be that you use the tool directly if you're not necessarily staffed with the right kind of people to do it well.
Yeah, Joanna, I totally agree. And I think a good point is this question is related to the previous question about what are the staffing implications. And I think what you just talked through, what we both just talked through, are great examples of how it frees up internal team members to do more elevated things, more analytical, more value-added things, and helps automate the more mundane kind of tactical media planning operations, and then frees up those resources to be trained and learned about analytics and customer insight and campaign strategy.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, last question, and this is probably for Joanna. So as Ford evolved from the nameplate focus over to more of a fluid budget, how did they handle brand safety?
Ah, boy. So I'm not sure if I talked. I'm sure I talked to them about it, although I didn't write about that specifically. And so that's probably in my notes from several months ago. I'd have to go back and look. But my bet would be that just knowing the Team Detroit folk, that stuff was always top of mind for them, that was interwoven into everything that they did. So when you're a hands-on user of these tools, there's all kinds of things that you can do to ensure brand safety, even without the use of external licensed kinds of systems that are sort of more formal brand safety kinds of tools. My bet is that they were probably using some or all of them within the bounds of reason. I think sometimes what happens with certain brands is they're so concerned about brand safety that they end up sort of limiting themselves more than they probably realize. So my bet would be just knowing the team that was fundamentally a part of what they were always doing as they were experimenting with things like building out programmatic.
Cool. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Scott. We are just about out of time, so I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and we'll be sending a link of the recording of the webinar within the next few days. So have a good afternoon.